So I have a few thoughts on Nightreign. Several, even. I don't know how long this will be, I really just want to talk about everything, so this video will be like a review, critique, and just generally discussing my thoughts on the game all in one, which of course means some ranting, so bear with me. Now, every review is obviously going to have some bias, but I would like to start out by explaining where some of mine comes from, so maybe the points I make throughout this video will make a bit more sense, and if you disagree with anything, that's totally fine, but you'll at least have a better idea about where I'm coming from and why I feel the way I do. I know a ton of people got into FromSoft games through Elden Ring, and among those people, I know there are a lot that played through it just once and maybe didn't see everything it had to offer, or didn't finish it at all, or maybe they were on the fence about buying it but heard how difficult or how big of a game it is and ultimately decided not to pick it up. As for myself, I started on Dark Souls 1 back in 2013, I played that whole series, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and have logged over 94 days of playtime in Elden Ring alone. So what I'm getting at here is I'm not exactly looking at this game through the eyes of a new player. And I'm not trying to argue that I know what I'm talking about just because I've played these games so much either. In fact, it's the opposite. I feel like this game is so divisive right now, and a big part of that I think is due to the initial reviews from people who got to play the game early, and frankly certain things that bother reviewers who have logged hundreds or even thousands of hours in Soulsborne games might not be an issue for someone with a more fresh perspective on the series. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, but a lot of people seem to overlook that. So as you watch this video, just keep in mind that these are my perspectives, which do come from a lot of experience with the franchise, but that might not be you, so I highly encourage you to come to your own conclusions, hopefully through actually trying the game yourself, whether that be now or after it goes on sale in the future. I'd love for more new players to give these games a try, and I don't want to push people away from that. There are going to be things I cover in this video that are complaints for me personally, but they might not apply to you. I do not speak for everyone. So with that, first I want to go over what Nightreign actually is, and just dispel some common misconceptions and confusion about the game. This is not Elden Ring 2. This is not an Elden Ring DLC. This is not a traditional Souls-like experience at all, and most of all, this is not a battle royale. Essentially, Nightreign is a cooperative roguelite experience set in the world of Elden Ring with slightly enhanced Elden Ring combat. There is a solo mode, but co-op is definitely the focus and what the game was designed around, and it borrows some mechanics from other genres and games, including heavily from Elden Ring itself, but that's the main gist of it. If you're like me, there's probably one word in that description that you're a bit more unfamiliar with, and that is roguelite. For those of you that are new to the roguelite genre, it's a style of game that typically entails trying to beat the entire game in one life. Along the way, you might level up, you might pick up new weapons, abilities, and upgrades, but if you die, you lose it all and you start from the beginning of the game. Roguelites generally feature randomized map layouts, randomized enemies, and randomized loot, so every run is completely unique, and much of the challenge and fun comes from trying to make the strongest build you can with the random drops that you get along the way. The randomness, and thus variety, is a huge selling point for keeping these games fun and engaging, so keep that in mind. Finally, they involve some form of meta progression, which is a fancy term for any kind of progression outside the core gameplay loop. In the context of roguelites, what usually happens is after you die, you'll be rewarded with some kind of items or currency that make your character permanently stronger in some way. Maybe you start with more health in all your future runs, maybe you permanently upgrade one of the weapons in the game, so whenever it drops it'll be even stronger, maybe you get a higher chance to get specific types of loot that you prefer using, stuff like that. So the regular progression is all the stuff you get within the run, and the meta progression is what you get when your run comes to an end to upgrade your character permanently. Because of the meta progression, each time you die you get a little stronger, and your future runs, with a bit of luck, should be a little bit easier. But I wanted to briefly explain that stuff because it's not at all what we've come to expect in a FromSoft game by this point, especially if that game has Elden Ring in the title. That sets certain expectations in the player's mind, and I've gotten the impression that a decent number of people in the community aren't very familiar with roguelites, so the quote-unquote changes to the standard Elden Ring formula feel really jarring, when in reality they're not so much changes per se. The game is actually just kind of a whole different genre than Elden Ring. I think a decent analogy is regular Call of Duty versus Warzone. Warzone is kind of Call of Duty, but it's technically a different genre of game. that just so happens to use systems and assets from traditional Call of Duty as a foundation. Same idea here. But Nightreign is a roguelite, which means you've got one life to complete an entire run, rather than a grand adventure through a huge world with lots of checkpoints that you can venture through at your own pace. That's not what fans of the series are used to or familiar with, so here's how it works. When you start a run in Nightreign, you'll pick one of 8 characters. Each character has a passive trait, a unique skill, and an ultimate ability. They all excel at a specific, unique playstyle. They all have their own stats that'll scale better or worse with certain types of weapons, and they all start with an appropriate weapon for their playstyle, which you can upgrade or replace during your run, which is technically called an expedition, so I should start saying that instead. Every expedition starts with you and your teammates dropping from the sky onto the map at a random location. Kind of similar to a battle royale game, except in Nightreign you all get dropped together and you don't get to pick where you go. It's always random. From here you have access to a map showing you all the points of interest in the world, which can all appear in slightly different locations and feature a few different varieties of enemies. Nightreign expeditions take place over the course of 3 in-game days, with a day lasting about 15 minutes. I think it's technically 14, so we'll go with that. After about 14 minutes, night falls and you'll have to fight a night boss, so you have until then to run around the map, killing enemies and bosses for runes and loot to upgrade and level up your character as much as you can before you fight the night boss. That means you have to move really quickly and work efficiently as a team to be successful. Nightreign borrows another feature from the battle royale genre to make this more exciting, and that's a damaging circle that shrinks the playable area over time. The circle will get smaller and smaller, eventually forcing you into the area that you'll be fighting the night boss, which is randomly picked from a pool of bosses you will recognize from Elden Ring, and even some from the Dark Souls games. If you beat the night boss, you get some loot, the game rolls over to day 2, and the damaging circle disappears, so you get full access to the whole map again, meaning you get 14 more minutes to run around and keep upgrading your character. The circle will eventually close again, you'll fight night boss number 2, and if you win, you teleport to a new location for day 3, where you'll take all the gear and upgrades you've acquired straight into the final boss of the expedition, called a Night Lord. This works a lot like Monster Hunter in that you get to pick which Night Lord you want to fight before you start an expedition. It's not a surprise, and you'll know what kind of damage it's weakest to ahead of time as well, so you can use that to plan your first 2 days and get set up as well as possible to take it down. Now the Night Lords are completely new bosses. They are not reused from previous games, and while I'm sure everyone will have a couple that they're not as fond of, I think it's fair to say that the majority of them are very cool and very high quality boss fights. As far as upgrading your character, everything has been super streamlined to match the speed of the gameplay, which is very fast paced. Leveling your character is still done at Sites of Grace using runes, but you don't level individual attributes, you just increase your character's overall level, and all of your stats are increased across the board. In fact, you don't even rest at the Graces, because that would genuinely slow you down too much. Just being in the proximity of a Site of Grace will replenish your health and FP, flask charges, and if you're quick, you can level up with just 2 button presses while you're sprinting past a Site of Grace without even stopping. It's very fluid. Builds, as you know them from previous games, work a bit differently due to the roguelite elements, and of course are entirely dependent on the loot you find in your expeditions. You have to make the best with what you get. You can equip up to 6 weapons at once, and all weapons will have a passive effect on them that you get just by having the weapon in your inventory. There are a few that require you to be holding the weapon, even if it's just in your offhand, but for the most part, you benefit by just owning the weapon. There are also no restrictions to which weapons you can use, regardless of which character you play. Like I said earlier, damage on weapons will naturally scale better with the stats of certain characters, but that doesn't mean you can't still utilize any weapon you find, it just might not do as much damage. But because of the way the weapon's passive buffs work, you don't need every weapon to do damage. Most of them will just be there to boost your character overall. For example, a character whose kit is focused around blocking and playing around a shield might find a catalyst or a bow that they wouldn't normally use, but it might have a passive ability that enhances guard counters. Just by keeping that equipped in their inventory, they get a huge upgrade to their character's natural playstyle from the weapon's passive effect. So essentially, you just run around for a little over half an hour, killing as many things as you can to find a weapon you like, stack some powerful buffs to make your character as strong as possible in order to kill the Night Lord. That's the core gameplay loop of Nightreign in a nutshell. Whether you defeat the Night Lord or not, you'll always be rewarded with some relics and a bit of currency at the end of an expedition. Relics have a set of effects on them that give you advantages like stat upgrades, specific skills or damage types on your starter weapon, or augment your character's abilities, so that's where the meta progression comes into play that I mentioned earlier. You can equip a few relics to make your character stronger or facilitate a certain playstyle. The currency you get can also be spent on gambling for more relics or buying cosmetics and things of that nature. Also, just for clarity's sake, there are ways to be revived throughout your run, either by other players or a self-res with a rare consumable item, and if you die during the day before the night boss spawns, you'll just drop your runes and you have a chance to go recover them, similar to pretty much any other Souls-like. But once all the players are down and nobody has a self-revive, that will be the end of the run. Outside of that core gameplay, there is a pretty cool story and lots of lore woven into the game in classic Elden Ring fashion. Each of the characters also has their own quest line, which you can progress by playing that character and completing expeditions and side objectives. And that's about it. So now that you know how the game works, let's talk about what the game does well and where I feel it's lacking. And then maybe we can wrap up with some unhinged ranting. We'll see. Starting with the good stuff in no particular order, the music. Kind of a random place to start, but I love the music in this game. It's so much more present than it was in Elden Ring, and the tempo and intensity of it really complements and even enhances the fast-paced, action-packed gameplay. I'm a big fan of it. Next are remembrance quests, or just the character quest lines. I was really pleasantly surprised by how well done the character quest lines were. I honestly didn't even expect there to be a story in this game at all going into it, probably just some Easter eggs and hints here and there to existing Elden Ring lore, but that's not the case at all. The story is really cool and the quests are done so much better than they were in Elden Ring, or any previous title for that matter. Don't get me wrong, they are not groundbreaking in the least, but some very basic quality of life features that are present in nearly every other game ever made have finally made their way into a FromSoft game. We have most of the quest objectives marked on the map, and we have a journal that continuously updates with new lore for the characters as you progress their stories, so you can keep track of them. Two features that were sorely missed in Elden Ring, which reminds me, the Codex is also another fantastic addition. There were technically some brief tutorial-like explanations tucked away in the menu somewhere in Elden Ring, but having a dedicated spot right in the hub roundtable hold where you can quickly get info on what each of the character's best attributes and preferred weapon types are, a database of all the weapons, items, skills, and spells in the game, an explanation of pretty much every single menu, keybind, and core mechanic in the game. It's just a great feature that I think has been a long time coming. FromSoft has notoriously bad tutorials and leaves out incredibly crucial information. I made 2 videos explaining stats and skills in regular Elden Ring, and it took almost 90 minutes to explain. So when I say having that info easily accessible in-game here is a nice feature, I really mean it. Character design. I think the character designs are honestly fantastic. I wouldn't be surprised if some of them got some slight tweaks for balancing purposes, but I have to give credit to the fact that all of them feel completely unique and have a very fun, niche playstyle. Not only do you have a character for 8 different broad class archetypes like a caster, archer, summoner, etc., you also have really interesting abilities built into each of them that make them feel so much more unique than those classic archetypes. For example, the archer has a melee dash that marks targets to take extra damage for a time. They're not just a stand far away and shoot some arrows kind of character. The katana wielding character can utilize deflections like Sekiro and then transform into a giant monster when they pop their ult, just because. The caster can combine different damage types to create various magic cocktails, each resulting in a totally unique spell depending on what elements they decide to combine. Another character starts with a dagger and can use their ultimate to turn invisible, which is not very original on its own, but instead of just being that kind of generic assassin type, they also have an ability that lets them re-trigger the last few seconds of damage to enemies around them, so you can do crazy stuff like re-trigger status effect procs or effectively let your teammates ult hit a boss twice. It's really cool. They all just feel like pretty fresh and creative takes on what are otherwise very basic stereotypical class archetypes, and especially interesting compared to how these builds would normally play in Elden Ring or Dark Souls. Nightreign makes them a lot less one-dimensional than they honestly could have been, and I'm very happy about that. The caster alone is so much more engaging to play than any conceivable caster build in previous titles, and I hope it inspires some serious improvements to Magic in future games. On to the Night Lords. I think all the Night Lords are pretty great, and some of them have become instant classics for me. I'm not going to spoil any of them in this video, aside from the first one, which I feel like everyone has pretty much seen by now. But even just this one is a great example of how they've done a good job at designing these bosses for co-op. It literally has a move where it can split into 3 separate entities to chase everyone down at the same time. Historically, bosses have had a pretty hard time keeping up with multiple players, even with the health boost they get when you bring summons along for the fight. With multiple players, it's so much easier to spam status effect procs, stagger the boss for free damage windows, and all the while the boss only really knows how to look at and hit one person at a time. It's not really fair. The Night Lords though have lots of moves in their arsenal that allow them to keep pressure on multiple players at the same time, whether it be through omnidirectional attacks or just taking away the numbers advantage. I also think this whole system is just a perfect way for FromSoft to implement new and experimental boss fights that didn't fit anywhere in their main games but still had really interesting stylistic concepts or mechanics. While I was streaming one of the Night Lord fights, someone in my chat told me that they thought that particular boss was supposed to be an Elden Ring and got cut. I didn't look into it myself, so I have no idea if that's true, but I wouldn't be mad because it was an awesome fight. In fact, it was so awesome that I wouldn't be at all surprised if it was already fully developed and then cut because the quality was so high. That being said, yeah, given the world and lore of Elden Ring, I have no idea where they could have possibly included that boss, but for cases like that, we have Nightreign now, and I think having a medium that exists just for fighting cool bosses is amazing. As far as balancing, I also think the Night Lords are in a pretty fair spot, which is nice. Quick bit of context, the level cap for Nightreign in one run is 15, and a very average run will usually put you at about level 12 or so going into the final boss fight. Ideally, you would definitely want to be higher, but unless your group is pretty coordinated and moving fast, people aren't dying, and the loot is decent, 12 to 13 is probably where you'll end up. Once you find your rhythm though, it's definitely not too crazy to get closer to 14, and even sometimes 15 on a really good run. The reason I'm bringing that up is because the bosses are pretty tough around level 12. You're going to do less damage to them, and they're going to take a lot more of your health with each hit because you just won't have as much health at level 12. That being said, if you get to level 14 plus and everyone on your team knows the boss well enough to not get hit and knocked down every 5 seconds, then you can really steamroll them. We're talking shaving entire minutes off the fight. So essentially the bosses feel like they're in a spot where you'll be punished a bit if you died too much during your prep time the first 2 days and didn't prepare very efficiently. And conversely, if you plan your route well and defeat lots of bosses during day 1 and 2, the Night Lord will feel much more manageable. Not necessarily easy, just less of a slog to get through the giant health bar. And I think that's a good place for them to be. Because instead of the traditional skill ceiling that only rewards how good you are at dodging a boss's attacks and finding the best opportunities for damage, there's a time element now, which means while you're fighting things to level up, you need to find every opportunity for damage while still striking that balance where you're not so aggressive to the point you're trading hits and dying. You also need to plan out your routes and loot effectively, and I like the fact that players get rewarded for doing all of those things well. It means there are new things to learn and strive to be proficient at, even if you're already a veteran of the series. I'll also say that as of the time of working on this video, there are enhanced Night Lords coming to the game soon, but they're not out yet, so I can't speak on them right now. Dark Souls bosses. So cool, man. We all saw the Nameless King in the trailer for this game and lost our minds. I mean, how cool is it that we get to fight those classic bosses with Elden Ring characters? I absolutely love the idea to include Dark Souls bosses in this game. I do have some criticisms with them, but I've already decided to get all the good stuff out of the way first, so I'll just bring this up again when we get to the bad stuff later. Another thing I like a lot is pacing. The game moves extremely quickly, and that's one of the more contentious features because it's one of those things that's just very different from Soulsborne games. The combat is faster, the leveling is instantaneous, there's no strategy or planning for which attributes you'll allocate your levels to. Some of these features sound awful to longtime fans of the series, but you have to remember, this just isn't the kind of game you think it is. It's not really a Souls-like, it's a fast-paced, cooperative roguelite. Sitting still to consider which attribute would be best to level up each time for the perfect build would completely kill the flow of the game, especially if 3 separate players had to stop to make that choice every level. Changes like that are just necessary for this style of gameplay to work, and in my opinion, it works really well. The amount of time it takes to get a build fully online in the original Elden Ring is quite literally dozens of hours for most people. In Nightreign, it happens in minutes. The number of bosses you'll fight over those dozens of hours in Elden Ring is also surprisingly comparable to the number of bosses you'll get to fight in just a couple hours of playing Nightreign. There's almost no downtime. If you're not fighting something in Nightreign, you're sprinting to the next closest thing to fight. You're always planning the best route to take and constantly readjusting that plan to accommodate surprise variables along the way. It's extremely action-packed, which is a wonderful change of pace from the leisurely exploration of Elden Ring. Am I saying it's a superior pace to Elden Ring's, or that Elden Ring shouldn't have had so much exploration, or that FromSoft's next game should move this fast? Absolutely not. But having the option to experience whichever one you're in the mood for by playing one game or the other is great. Elden Ring's combat can be really fun, but playing through the same areas repeatedly with the same enemy placements every time can get repetitive and predictable, and having to waste time getting from one boss to the next can make it feel too tedious if you just want to fight something. On the other hand, being able to take down over a dozen bosses in under an hour with a different playstyle and unique set of weapons and abilities every time is incredibly fun. I do love exploration in most games, but if the combat systems are fun enough, sometimes it feels like the travel time between fights is just interrupting the fun that you could be having with the combat. It's literally suffering from success, and Nightreign fixes that for those who are looking for an experience focused more on combat. And lastly, with pacing, the map density and speed of the circle closing do a really good job at keeping you very busy. Now, I know it's not a battle royale, but in several battle royales that I've played in the past, all with that closing circle mechanic, of course, there are matches where it feels like you're just running or sitting for most of the match because you can't find any other players to fight, you can't find any loot, maybe you don't need any more loot, so you're not incentivized to get any more, you're already safe inside the circle, or the circle just keeps moving away to a place far away from you so you can't stop running. None of those problems are an issue in this game. The map is so densely packed with points of interest, and there are even field bosses in some of the gaps between those points, so you can always find something to do close by. You can't sit still because your time to prepare for nightfall is so limited. You'll never reach a point where you don't need more runes because you can always upgrade your character more, always stack more passive buffs, and always buy more stuff from merchants. If the circle happens to be far away, you'll have to be strategic because spending too long just running and not farming up runes will result in you being underleveled, but taking too long clearing locations outside the safe zone might mean getting caught in the circle and dying. Overall, the pacing just feels very good to me. Let's talk about some good quality of life changes they made. There are quite a few restrictions, I guess you could call them, that would normally exist in Soulsborne games that have been lifted in Nightreign, and they're really nice quality of life improvements. Are they things I think they should bring into the next major FromSoft game? Not necessarily for most of them, but in Nightreign they feel really good, so I'm glad that they made these changes. For instance, the archer has infinite ammo. You can spam as many arrows as you want, and to make up for not being able to choose what kind of arrows you shoot, the bows themselves that you find in your runs will have intrinsic damage types built into them. On top of that, you can also use weapon grease on bows to change their damage type again. It's really nice for exploiting enemy weaknesses and just generally boosting DPS, so you're not missing out on certain elements of build crafting or optimizing your setup for a certain Night Lord just because you picked a certain character. In that same vein, another big thing is no stat requirements for weapons and spells. Anyone can use whatever weapon they want, even if it doesn't match the theme of their character's playstyle, and same goes for spells. If you find a catalyst or seal with a spell that you like, all of that just facilitates such flexible gameplay where you can use literally anything that sounds fun to you, and you don't have to stop and think, oh man, that seems cool, but I don't have the right stats or character for it. And of course, you can always drop those weapons or spells for your teammates if one of them is playing a character that could get more use out of it. Oh, and I almost forgot, you can backstab people with the bow and arrow too. It's so sick. Now this one might be a little controversial, but hear me out. You will absolutely have an advantage going into this game if you're already familiar with Elden Ring, but I actually think Nightreign is a pretty good way to get someone into Elden Ring. Let me explain. Elden Ring is a massive game. It's really big. Let's just be honest, it's a little too big. There are so many empty stretches of land with nothing but flowers and roa fruit, and there are a ton of reused bosses. That doesn't mean that you can't still love the game, and that doesn't mean that it's not still a fantastic game, because it is, but it is huge, and it takes a very long time to see everything. One of the downsides to that is the barrier to entry for new players. How many people do you think tried Elden Ring as their first FromSoft game, played it for a while, and said, yeah, this is pretty cool, but I've already played for over 20 hours and I don't really feel like I'm making any meaningful progress and I don't really know where I'm supposed to be going? I know I make YouTube videos about that game, so I have a bigger sample size to hear that kind of stuff than most of you, but even still, I've heard something similar from more than one person out in the real world in my personal life. I just checked the Elden Ring achievements on my Xbox, and I don't think there's an achievement for beating the actual final boss, but only a little over 24% of people have the achievement for beating the second to last boss right before that. Only 13.63% of people have the achievement for the default Elden Lord ending, and the other easiest ending to unlock, Age of Stars, is about the same, with about 14.48% of players having the achievement for it. Now, I know tons of people buy games and don't ever actually play them, which skews those numbers a lot, but still, for a game as popular and massively successful as Elden Ring, that is thousands of players that genuinely gave the game a shot and did not make it to the end. One of the reasons players have a hard time committing to such a long game is because they don't know what awaits them if they stick with it. They don't know how good it gets. Now, I don't think early game Elden Ring combat is boring necessarily, but it's very far from its ultimate potential at that point. Combat doesn't fully come online until pretty late in the game. So many awesome weapons and spells are locked in the final few zones of Elden Ring, and most builds aren't really complete without them. The crazy thing is though, by the time you're that far in the game, everything you fight is so strong that you don't even really feel all that powerful, despite how insane your weapons and skills might be. Veterans of the series know that New Game Plus is kinda where it's at for combat, because you get to play through the whole game start to finish with your endgame build and really feel how strong it is. The problem is so many players never make it that far in the game to even reach the end, let alone even if you did finish the game after spending like 80 plus hours on one playthrough. Most people aren't going to feel like hopping straight into a New Game Plus playthrough to do it all over again. At best, most players are going to have fun with an endgame build for the last few hours of Elden Ring, beat the final boss, and then call it a day. So maybe you see where I'm going with this. In Nightreign, you get to fight with roughly the equivalent of an endgame Elden Ring build in under 30 minutes of playing. You get to experience all kinds of different enemies and bosses in under an hour. It's so good for letting you hop straight into the action and experience how fun Elden Ring combat can be. Even if you're not new, it's great for giving you the opportunity to try some of the over 300 weapons in Elden Ring that you probably haven't really used before. I was talking to my brother the other day who did not play Elden Ring, but he's now completely addicted to Nightreign, and despite being incredibly confused by weapon upgrades, damage types, scaling, all the stuff that will forever be hard to learn in these games, he really wants to try Elden Ring now. Nightreign is what pushed him over the edge as a brand new player to try Elden Ring, as a brand new player that once had to ask me for help with the Dark Souls 2 tutorial 10 years ago because he couldn't figure out how to jump a small gap and hasn't touched the series since. Until now. So those are some of the really cool, good features that come to mind. Don't take that to mean that anything I didn't just talk about is bad. Those are just the things that really stood out to me as awesome features. If I say I like waffles, it doesn't mean I hate pancakes. Now, as we get into the bad stuff, some of these things are not awful by any means, but there's definitely a lot of room for improvement. And if there is something that really does suck, you'll be able to tell by the way I talk about it. Speaking of which, missing features. No crossplay in a co-op game in the year 2025. What are we doing? I play on Xbox, my brother plays on PC, and my best friend plays on PS5. My dream squad will never unite in this game. It's a tragedy. There is no excuse for not having crossplay in a multiplayer game these days, especially if the game is built from the ground up for multiplayer play. Bruh moment. There is also no in-game voice chat. Once again, this is a cooperative game. It's a game in a series that is famous for being challenging, and it's a game that requires non-stop teamwork from start to finish. Why would we not have voice chat built into the game? Bruh moment number 2. There is a way to ping items and locations on the map at the very least. If there wasn't that, then the game might genuinely be unplayable. But while that's a good start, the no voice chat thing is kind of crazy to me. I get not wanting to use it, but I don't get not having the option. There's also no 2-person or 4-person mode. I heard that the lack of a 2-player mode has been acknowledged as a mistake and there are plans to add it. Still, super weird choice to have only solo or 3-player modes on release. I haven't heard anything about a 4-person mode yet, which is not the end of the world, but I do also think it's a little strange to cap at 3 players, because I sort of associate a full party in Dark Souls co-op with being 4 players, 1 host and 3 summons. Maybe that's just me, but yeah, a couple of glaring and very problematic missing features here. I wasn't really sure whether to label this as limited roguelite elements or non-impactful upgrades, but it's kind of both wrapped into one. This is a tough one. I know a lot of people are so upset at the fact that there are roguelite elements in the game at all, but if you take the game for what it is and just accept that it is a roguelite, it doesn't have the absolutely insane build variety and potential that other roguelites I've played do. Full transparency, I have not played a ton of roguelites either, so I'm mostly basing what I'm about to say off of my time playing Dead Cells and Hades. But in those games, there are runs where you get upgrades that have such insane synergies that you genuinely feel like a god. As long as you can dodge the bosses decently well, your build is so insane that victory is almost a foregone conclusion. Nightreign does have some potential for this if you get lucky enough to stack certain buffs, but it generally feels much more tame in comparison to other games in the genre. The other big problem is when you defeat a boss and get to choose one of 3 upgrades for your character, you get to choose between weapons that already existed in Elden Ring or buffs to your character's stats. I've played Elden Ring with most of these weapons already, and aside from whatever random passive effect they give you, they're the exact same weapon. It's nothing new. And stat boosts are just not fun or interesting unless they're, like, huge. You ultimately feel like you're working towards a really strong but very reasonable Elden Ring build, like something you could actually make in the game, instead of something crazier with power levels that you could never have achieved in the original game. You can choose from powers like plus 20 to 25% more poise, 10% health or FP regen when you land a crit, 10 to 15% better guard breaking ability, and all that stuff is nice, but unless you get lucky enough to keep finding the same effect and stack it several times, it just doesn't feel that impactful or exciting. You almost never get to the point where your build feels genuinely crazy. I don't want everything to be buffed so much to where you end up being overpowered on every single run, but I do think it should be common enough that, let's just say, like 1 in every 10 runs, you just get a diabolical stack of one of those buffs where you're pretty much healing your entire health bar by landing a crit, or you have double your normal health bar, or insanely quick recharge time on your ult. Stuff like that is so fun, and in my mind definitely expected to happen when you're playing a roguelite, but it just doesn't in Nightreign. So many of these upgrades feel like you're just equipping a new talisman in Elden Ring. It's technically a power boost, sure, but it's not original or fun. Same goes for the weapons. I enjoyed the weapon catalog in Elden Ring a lot, but give me some crazier weapon skills in Nightreign. Give me ways to make my weapon feel more powerful than it ever could in Elden Ring. I've cut down so many enemies with the Godslayer Greatsword in my time, and it works just as well in Nightreign, but it doesn't feel any different. Everything works fine, most things feel pretty well balanced, but this is a genre where you should be able to get lucky once every few runs and put together a build that does not feel balanced. But it doesn't feel like Nightreign really wants you to do that, which I think is kind of a shame. It's a glaring example of how trying to keep it too similar to Elden Ring is really holding the game back, in my opinion. Now for relics. I mentioned the relics briefly earlier as items you could equip 3 of to enhance your character slightly before your run starts. These are a great idea. I'm glad they're in the game, but they are so underdeveloped it's kind of insane. The relics can have 1 to 3 effects on them depending on the quality. The effects are random, so you get tons of them that have 1 or 2 effects that are great for one of your characters, and then a third effect that's just clearly meant for a different character. In fact, they can even have effects that are exclusive to one of the characters because it augments one of their special abilities. So, for example, you'll get a relic that increases Raider's poise when he's standing near his ult. Raider is your classic, big, heavy armor, high poise, high strength character, so that's great. But then you might get unlucky and the other 2 effects on that same relic are plus 2 dexterity and increased FP. Well, I'm not using dexterity weapons or casting on Raider 99% of the time, so those are not helpful. That means a lot of time you're just hoarding relics until you get ones that have at least 2, hopefully 3 effects that are all useful together. and then you just sell the rest and use that money to gamble for more relics at the merchant, hoping you get lucky. You can buy a blank slate relic from the merchant that can turn into any color relic with any number of effects on it, but you don't know what you get until you buy it. On top of that, even when you do get ones that have the effects you want, they're just super underwhelming. You have some useful ones like giving your starting weapon a specific damage type or weapon skill, which can be very helpful for guaranteeing that you have a weapon that matches the Night Lord's weakness in case you don't find something else like that in your run. But the stat boosts like +3 strength or +1 arcane, as of right now, seem to do genuinely nothing. Even a +3 stat boost, which is the highest you can get, does almost nothing. To show you an example, if I take Raider, who we can see in the visual codex here, has an S rating for strength, and the starting weapon, Raider's Great Axe, also has S scaling with strength, so boosting our strength level should be a big damage boost. You can also see in the top left corner, I have my character set at level 15, so my stats are as high as they can be. If I test him with no relics equipped, you can see on this target dummy I'm doing 180 damage. If I stack all my relics with strength boosts, I have a +3 strength here, +3 strength, and a +2 strength, because I didn't have another +3 handy, but that is +8 strength, and with that he does a whopping 187 damage. Only 7 more. If those just said +1 damage instead of +1 strength, it would put me at 188. Just a straight +8 regular damage points would quite literally hit harder than whatever boost this +8 strength is giving me. That is insanity. I wanted to add a quick disclaimer here that since recording this, I've learned that due to the way leveling up in this game works, these stat upgrades are actually more impactful at lower levels, so giving this example on a level 15 character was not the way to do it. However, even with this same example of +8 strength on my relics, it's still only a matter of 10 to 15 more damage per swing, so the point still stands, but I didn't want it to seem like I was cherry picking the most offensive example. If that wasn't bad enough, there's also barely any customization opportunity realistically, because you'll unlock really good relics that are tailor-made for your character by doing their quests, and each of the Night Lords you defeat also gives you a pretty powerful just general relic that anyone can use. So with only 3 relic slots, you're barely ever even using these regular ones after you play a character for a few sessions. An example of these is with Wilder. With no buffs, this is what my character skill chained into an attack looks like, and this is what my ult looks like. With Wilder's special relics, this is what they look like. Obviously, you're going to use those relics always. There's no good reason not to, so the relic system is just really bad. I definitely think there should be more than 3 relic slots at the very least, so you don't lose all your choice by being forced to use those 3 slots on the almost necessary relics for your character. But across the board, these need massive buffs. I should be able to make some big changes to my build with relics, and the upgrades I find in game should compound that further. Despite how awful they are, fortunately they don't ruin the game. The problem is they just don't really affect the game either, and they are such an obvious avenue to make the entire game more interesting, so it's just such an airball. Let's talk about solo queuing and playing with randoms. This isn't objectively an issue obviously, but I did want to touch on it briefly. In Nightreign you have all the same issues you have solo queuing with randoms in literally every other multiplayer game ever made. You're going to have some absolutely terrible matches and terrible teammates from time to time, and you also have the potential to get great matches where you can get hard carried every now and then. It's a totally mixed bag. There's nothing you can do to change that except find some friends. It is what it is. But in this game, there are some specific things that really do suck. Lack of coordination is the big one. There are usually one of 3 main things that happen when you play with randoms. One is that nobody knows where to go and stands around waiting for someone else that they can follow. This is kind of best case scenario if you know what you're doing, because then they'll probably just follow your route, but there's still some time wasted because nobody's taking any initiative. Like if I'm the leader and everyone's waiting on me, but I find some loot that I really have to stop and think about for a sec, normally my teammates could go on without me and get started on the next location, but they're not going to start running to the next location without me, so it holds up the whole team. Scenario 2 is the opposite, where your teammates are so stubborn and insist on following their own path. You can ping something else all day long and they will not budge. Sometimes they take a path that doesn't make any sense and isn't very efficient, but because of the nature of the game, you really do need all 3 players attacking every boss together to keep up the pace you need to be successful. So if you don't just follow them and do what they want to do, you're kind of screwed by the time the Night Lord comes around, because splitting up is just not an option. The third scenario is where one guy just runs away doing his own thing the whole time. You and the other player are struggling because you have less damage and stagger potential on whatever you're fighting. Since it's just the 2 of you, you have one less person available to help with revives, and the guy running around on his own is accomplishing nothing and dying constantly, but they're too far away to get revived, so they just waste even more time running back to get their runes over and over again. It's an awful experience. Aside from those situations, there's also a big problem with leavers. I get into a lot of games where someone doesn't like the way that their teammates look during the first 2 minutes of the run and just decides to leave. I also see people leave because someone else picked the same character as them and they don't want to compete for loot. It's kind of insane, and because you can always respawn up until the night boss, there's no way to end a run until nightfall, which is about 15 minutes in. It really blows when someone leaves right away. You can reconnect pretty quickly though if you actually do disconnect, which is a plus. Another big issue if you're solo queuing is the fact that only one player can work on a remembrance quest at a time. If you have a remembrance quest active, which you can go to a spot in the game and pause them at any time if you want to get around this, but then of course you're not progressing your quest. If you do have a quest active though, and say that quest is to kill a certain specific boss, so you queue up for that boss with your remembrance quest active, because only one player in the squad can have a quest objective active at a time, it's going to put you in a separate queue that takes forever. It is not unrealistic if you're solo queuing and trying to get a remembrance quest objective done to sit in the lobby waiting for a game for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, even longer. I've heard people say that they've waited for upwards of an hour, and I'm genuinely not surprised. The second you pause your remembrance quest, you'll find a game instantly. There are lots of people playing right now, but especially once the player base thins out a bit in the future, I don't know how this is going to work. It's really, really bad. Your options are basically either get 2 other friends who are okay with helping you with your quests, and then you can help them with theirs after, or just solo queuing. And that can be tough because some of the objectives do require you to kill one of the Night Lords, kill multiple Night Lords even, and if you're not feeling like you're up to the challenge of playing solo, you're kind of stuck. Let's talk about the lack of Dark Souls in the game. I love that they included Dark Souls bosses. However, what I don't love is that there are only 6 of them. 2 from each Dark Souls game, and they're not like all fan favorites by any means. They're not bad bosses, I'm not mad at the ones they picked, but if you're only including 2, I feel like they should be the best 2, you know? Like, Nameless King is definitely top 2 for me from Dark Souls 3, but a lot of other choices seem kind of random. They opened Pandora's box by adding anything from Dark Souls at all, so why not just send it all the way? Add more Dark Souls bosses. Add regular Dark Souls enemies out in the world. Add Dark Souls weapons and spells. It doesn't make sense. There are even events in Nightreign where you can be invaded by Margit, just like in Elden Ring, or one of the locations on the map will have evil versions of the Nightreign characters as hostile NPCs that you have to kill. To me, those would have been incredible places to have some classic Dark Souls encounters like Patches or Knight Kirk from Dark Souls 1 and 3, or the Forlorn Invaders, or even the Pursuer from Dark Souls 2. Mechanically, it's the same thing that's already in the game, but it adds more variety, and that's very, very important in a game like this. And of course, there's the nostalgia element to it too. Not only that, but like the Burnt Ivory King boss from Dark Souls 2's DLC is legitimately made for co-op. It involves several night enemies at the same time, and before you go into the fight, you explore the nearby areas to recruit your own knights to help you. It's like an all-out war, and it would have been a sick addition to this game. In fact, there are multiple boss fights in that DLC that are you outnumbered by bosses. Ornstein and Smo or the Bell Gargoyles are infamous multi-boss fights that would have been great for a co-op game. The Demon Princes in the Dark Souls 3 DLC would also be amazing. I genuinely think that using Nightreign as a platform to be able to fight every enemy and boss from every FromSoft game with any weapon they've ever designed would be so much fun, and the foundation is set perfectly for that to happen. Trying to keep it limited to Elden Ring even after they clearly show that they're okay with bringing in some Dark Souls content is just a huge fumble if you ask me. I mean, already the enemy variety at different locations around the map is super limited. You could immediately double the variety by just adding Dark Souls Hollows, and I really hope that happens. Next, I've got repeat night bosses. Now, the night bosses are not bad, but there is one thing that really bothers me about them. One positive is that many of them have some slightly altered moves, or they have some adds with them in the fight, which makes it much more engaging for co-op. Or some of them will just be two bosses at the same time, which is perfect for a game like this. You need to spread out and coordinate who is taking aggro on what, so you can get rid of all the adds that spawn with the boss before everyone can finally gang up on the boss itself. Or if it's a duo boss, one person might be playing defense and just keeping one of the bosses distracted, so the other two players can gang up on the other boss without worrying about getting hit in the back. Like I said during the Night Lord section earlier, bosses typically have a hard time handling multiple players in co-op, so changing the fights to accommodate co-op is really appreciated. However, what frustrates me to no end is the pool of potential night bosses. Once again, I'm not going to spoil the final boss Night Lords because they are new and they're good, but I will spoil the night bosses because we've seen all of them in Elden Ring already, so I don't feel like that's really a spoiler. One of the biggest, if not genuinely the single biggest criticism of Elden Ring is the number of repeat bosses. The number of times you fight a boss that is the exact same enemy as another fight somewhere else in the game. And in Nightreign, they had the audacity to make quite literally every single night boss one of the same bosses that were reused in Elden Ring so many times. I'm not going to waste time going through the entire list here, but I'll name a few examples to highlight how insane this is. One of the night bosses is Tree Sentinel. There are 3 Tree Sentinel bosses in Elden Ring, 5 if you include the DLC. I've fought a lot of Tree Sentinels already, I don't need to fight more. There is a Bell-Bearing Hunter night boss. There are 5 Bell-Bearing Hunter fights in Elden Ring. There is a Knights Cavalry night boss. There are 9 Knights Cavalry encounters in Elden Ring. There's a Crucible Knight and Hippo duo night boss. In Elden Ring, there are 16 Crucible Knights if you count the 2 Spirit versions in the Spirit Collar Snail fight. And I believe there are 5 Hippos in the DLC. Also, side note, that's like the only thing in the whole game from the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. It's like the least interesting and probably most hated enemy in the DLC. It was the one they decided to bring back. Like, why? Now, just to be clear, I am only upset about these being night bosses. I think reusing bosses in the locations around the Nightreign map during the day is perfectly okay and it makes sense because those are all mini boss caliber enemies. Stuff where a Knight's Cavalry or Crucible Knight makes perfect sense. I'm good with that. They're not unique individual beings, they're basically just a strong enemy type, like Rune Bears or Ancient Heroes of Zamor, Erdtree Burial Watchdogs, stuff like that. We've definitely seen a lot of those in Elden Ring too, but I'm okay with those being reused here. I'm even okay with the night bosses I just listed being reused as field bosses during the day too. But the night bosses are like the big skill checks during Nightreign. Aside from the Night Lord on day 3, the Night 1 and 2 bosses are the only 2 places where you can actually fully die and lose your run. They also give some of the biggest rewards. They should be challenging and exciting to fight. And fighting Godskin Apostles and Nobles and Crucible Knights and Bell-Bearing Hunters for the 100th time just is not doing it for me. I think night bosses should have been remembrance bosses from Elden Ring and of course also old Dark Souls bosses too. Maybe they didn't think players could handle fighting Millennia on night 2 and dying before they got to the night boss, but I think it would be sick, and it would also be a cool way to get legendary weapons way more often. Imagine if you beat Millennia on night 2 and you could pick between either her Hand of Millennia katana, or adding Scarlet Rot to your weapons, or massive status effect resistances to help with some of the Night Lords that build those up. I think that would be cool, but unfortunately, none of those remembrance bosses from Elden Ring are in the game. None of the ones that we remembered for being cool are here, just the ones that we remembered as the things that we just dreaded fighting. Crucible Knights, Hippos, it doesn't make sense. Another issue I have is with the map variety, or lack thereof. There's only one map in Nightreign, sort of. The map looks like Limgrave stylistically, which is fine, but having templates that look like Caelid or Altus or Liurnia would be really cool for some visual variety. The locations of points of interest on the map are always randomized, and the enemies inside are slightly randomized in that you can get a couple different enemy sets for each location. For instance, a camp might have Lanedale Knights or Redmane Knights, it might have Banished Knights or Misbegotten. A fortress might have a Golem boss on the roof or a Crystallian. So you won't know for sure, but after playing the game for a couple days, you're never surprised by what you find. There's only a couple possibilities. On top of that, when you look at your map, you'll notice damage types marked at certain locations where you're more likely to get that type of damage on your loot, which is great for finding things that the Night Lord is weak to, but it also adds some consistency to your runs, which is not the best for a game where the replay value hinges on getting a unique experience every time. I'm pretty torn on this, but there is a whole element of map knowledge in this game that on the one hand is pretty cool because it's exciting to learn when you first pick up the game, but on the other hand, once you've gained some experience, it means your routes get more and more predictable over time. There are certain things that are guaranteed to drop a certain type of loot, and if that type of loot is crucial to your run, then you're going to go for it every time pretty much. For instance, the churches will always give you an additional flask charge, so you should always be hitting them when you can. The mines in the game will always give you a smithing stone to upgrade your weapon from blue to purple rarities, so if you ever get stuck with an unupgraded weapon by day 2, you will always have that guaranteed safety net to get a purple weapon if you still need one. There's a spot in the castle that will always give you a choice of 3 random talismans, which are otherwise only found through teardrop scarabs, which only drop 1 random talisman for your whole team, so it's the only surefire way to get a decent talisman on your expedition, which means you pretty much always stop there. There are just a lot of things that are kind of guaranteed for a game where every run is supposed to be unique. One really interesting mechanic they have, which I do like a lot, is Shifting Earth. Every so often, a Shifting Earth event will occur where for a time, about a quarter of the map will be changed very significantly. One puts a giant volcanic crater in the middle of the map. One of them changes an entire corner of the map into infested Scarlet Rot Woods. There's a giant Eternal City one, and there's a giant Snowy Mountain one. These areas will be filled with enemies and bosses that you can't find anywhere else on the standard Nightreign map, and they also have incredibly powerful buffs to be collected if you manage to complete them. Honestly, I love them. They're some of the most fun parts of the game. They're very challenging, but the potential rewards are absolutely insane. That being said, the rewards are so good that if there's a Shifting Earth event, you should be doing it. And they're extensive enough that almost all of day 2 on any run with a Shifting Earth event will be spent clearing it if you want to clear the entire place. Not only that, but the circle will always close around the Shifting Earth if it's present in your game. Once you see the Shifting Earth, you know where the day 2 circle is about to close. Again, I'm very torn on this because they do take a while to do, and it is definitely a skill check. The fact that there is a map knowledge element of the game is fun, and it's nice to have contingency plans for when you're just getting shafted with the loot drops, but I do think that the lack of map variety and route planning once you played for a while is one of the first things that starts to feel repetitive. Adding new map templates that don't look like Limgrave would be a great start, I think. Adding more creative ways to mix up the strategy and routes like Shifting Earth would also be awesome. Adding more enemy variety at each location would also be great. Once again, the foundation is there, they just need to keep building on it, and I think the game could be amazing. Ooh, okay, time for a hot take. Let's talk about reused assets. I've actually said a lot of what I wanted to say about reused assets throughout this video already, but here it goes. I don't think reusing assets is objectively bad. I think historically in the gaming industry, when a developer is very clearly reusing assets, it has been a negative because they try to sell a sequel that is exactly the same as its predecessor for full price, and you're essentially paying for the same game again, like Madden or FIFA games, for example. However, there is a ton of passion and heart and soul that goes into the art in FromSoft games. The enemies, the bosses, the armor, the weapons, the levels, the whole world. Nearly every asset genuinely is so unique and high quality, and I actually think it would be kind of a shame not to revisit any of that. Nightreign is enough of a remix with the new gameplay style that I personally just don't believe it's inherently lazy at all. However, I'm putting this in the bad section because of what I've been saying this whole video. They just did not push the new stuff hard enough. I think with the amount of time and money they saved to not having to create new field bosses, night bosses, enemies, locations, weapons, all that stuff. There should have been a lot more depth to the new things like the relics and loot. And there should have been a lot more reused assets. Elden Ring Remembrance bosses, Dark Souls, everything. So all in all, reusing the assets is fine for this game in my opinion, but it created a ton of potential that I don't think they capitalized on nearly enough. But anyways, that's pretty much my general list of things I really like and really don't like in this game. Not exhaustive by any means, but those are the big things that came to mind. So to wrap up and conclude this video, I just want to give my general overall thoughts on Nightreign and where I would like to see it go. Like I said before, I do think Nightreign is genuinely fun. That doesn't mean that it's a masterpiece by any means. In fact, there are a ton of complaints I have about the game, as you just heard. But I also don't have a super negative doomer mindset about it that a lot of people in the community seem to have right now. And before I try to give you a final verdict, let me get a couple things straight. There are some very strange unspoken rules about video game ratings and reviews, as well as FromSoft games in particular. First of all, there's this mentality that if a game is a 7 out of 10, it's mid or even straight up bad. If a game scores less than a 7, it's basically a complete flop. Absolute disaster. I was going to make my own graphic to demonstrate, but I found this one in about 5 seconds, which represents it perfectly. On the bottom is a well-balanced, fair scale, and on top you have a pretty good representation of what I just described. We really need to start using this whole scale. Not every game is in the 7 to 10 range. Furthermore, in the world of video games, FromSoft has a track record of making some absolute bangers. That has bought them a lot of goodwill in the gaming community to the point that criticizing any part of their biggest titles is almost taboo. It's blasphemous. You can't say anything bad about Bloodborne, Dark Souls 3, or Elden Ring without making a lot of people very upset, because many people consider those games to be masterpieces. On the other hand, it's also set this expectation that every new game by FromSoft must be and will be a masterpiece, a 10 out of 10 game. And in the case of Nightreign, that phenomenon, for the first time in a very long time, has really hurt them from a public perception standpoint. So when I say that Nightreign is, in my honest opinion, a 7 out of 10 game, this is what I mean. And honestly, I might even have been able to give it closer to an 8 had I not recognized all the potential it has to be so much better. For what it is, it's really fun, but my god, it could be so much more. And again, some of these things bother me because I'm incredibly biased. If I hadn't already played nearly every Soulsborne game to death, some of these things wouldn't annoy me as much. A new player isn't going to complain about the bosses they reused from Elden Ring, or the fact that all the weapons feel the same as Elden Ring because they've never seen any of it before. All in all, there are far more hours of fun to be had in this game than I thought there would be. There's more story to this game than I thought there would be, and I've been very pleasantly surprised with how much fun I've been able to have. But I would really like to see FromSoft take the game much, much further than they have so far. I think the Soulsborne formula is getting old. It's getting stale. FromSoft is really good at what they do, and they know that, which is why I think they've been able to get away with limited innovation in their games for so long now. Change is good. Innovation is absolutely necessary. But to innovate, you have to take risks every now and then. You have to try new things. Nightreign takes a very big risk by shifting into an entirely new genre, and a lot of players aren't happy about it. But let's just consider a few things about FromSoft games before everyone in the community starts panicking. I mean, people already started panicking, but I'm going to talk about this stuff anyway. Despite the fact that people are so afraid of change, FromSoft's new IPs are usually a really big hit. Dark Souls was a massive success and everyone wanted more of it. Just keep making more Dark Souls. Then this new thing called Bloodborne comes out. Same Souls-like formula with a few tweaks, but a brand new experience, and again, it was a massive success. Everyone wants more Bloodborne now. People are begging for a sequel or even just a remaster, anything. And it's not even a Dark Souls game, the thing that they used to be obsessed with and thought that nothing would ever top. Then comes Sekiro. Again, very similar formula, but still a fresh experience. Sekiro was the farthest from the traditional Souls formula, and yet it still managed to be a massive success and win Game of the Year. Then a few years later comes Elden Ring. It's like Dark Souls but open world. That's what people were saying about it before it released, and that alone was more than enough to get people excited, because Dark Souls was so good that people just want more of it. I know tons of people want them to just keep cooking with whatever their favorite series is. More Dark Souls, more Bloodborne, more Sekiro, more Elden Ring. But whenever FromSoft announces something new, the community gets incredibly nervous, and then the game drops, and it's actually incredible. And that is in no small part thanks to their approach to innovation. FromSoft loves to take something people loved from their previous games and incorporate it into the next game. It sounds kind of obvious, but think about how much each game is influenced by its predecessors. You have Dark Souls 1 as a super successful foundation. Now, incoming hot take, I'm about to say something nice about Dark Souls 2, so now would be a good time to pause and dislike the video if that's your thing. Dark Souls 2 simplified the weapon upgrade system a lot and added way more freedom in infusing whatever damage type you wanted into your weapons. Dark Souls 2 let you fast travel right at the beginning of the game. You had way more freedom to pick which order you would progress through the game. If you don't believe me, here's a picture showing the level progression in Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3. Look at how many different directions you can go from that center node. Boss weapons were way more accessible. You didn't have to max out a random weapon of the same type to infuse with a boss soul like in Dark Souls 1. As cool as that was, it was not very intuitive. Dark Souls 2 also had way more areas and bosses than the first game. Those are just a few examples that come to mind. Bloodborne came next and kept a lot of the interconnectivity of Dark Souls 1's map because people liked that a lot, while also incorporating a lot of crossroads where the player could pick which area they wanted to go to first, just like Dark Souls 2. Boss weapons were again much more accessible. Fast travel was immediately accessible. Then they tried a couple new things. The game was much more fast-paced. The playstyle rewarded aggression and trying to break the enemy's stance. Bosses were much faster and much more aggressive. They tried out trick weapons where you had a new keybind that would change the way a weapon works and alter your playstyle a bit. Sounds a little bit like the weapon arts they added in a future game, doesn't it? They also had a big miss, which was a lack of build variety compared to the Souls series. FromSoft tends to learn from those mistakes too. Dark Souls 3, we get a ton of build variety. We get FP and a new flask to be able to replenish spellcasts more easily, to make it easier to branch out with your build and incorporate some magic. Players enjoyed the fast pace of Bloodborne, and lo and behold, Dark Souls 3 is significantly faster paced than the previous entries in the series because Bloodborne proved that players can handle the more difficult, more aggressive enemies. While there isn't the same game-wide emphasis on aggression, if you do manage to quickly chain lots of heavy attacks on an enemy or boss, it'll stagger and you get a big crit. Sounds a lot like Bloodborne to me. Weapons now had built-in skills or weapon arts that added an extra level of depth to your weapon and playstyle similar to trick weapons. And of course, fast travel, extensive weapon customization, awesome boss fights, boss weapons. All this stuff is being borrowed from its success in previous games where they first decided to try it. I don't want to keep going down this rabbit hole with every game, but that's the pattern. They make a new sequel with a few small unique changes, or they make a new IP where they can more safely try out bigger changes without alienating as many fans. And all of those successful systems get brought into the next title, regardless of what series it's a part of. Think about how many of those things I've just mentioned have influenced Elden Ring. That game is absolutely the combination of every game before it, but this time in an open world. But that's the thing, despite all I just said, Elden Ring can still kind of be boiled down to open world Dark Souls. Sure, it's an oversimplification, but it's not that far off. The innovations have almost never felt so new and so impactful to me that the games don't still feel like they could be part of the same series. Bloodborne and Sekiro definitely stretch the bounds further than any of the Dark Souls games, but both of those games still feel so familiar. I think people need to let FromSoft take some big swings and try new things. If you gathered anything from what I've just said in the past few minutes, it should be that trying new things has allowed each game to be better and better up to Elden Ring, which is so widely considered to be a genuine masterpiece. Nightreign isn't Elden Ring 2, and it doesn't have the classic Souls-like gameplay loop. If that's not for you, then that's okay, but people are comparing apples to oranges, wanting this roguelite to be a Souls-like, wanting this new game to just be more Elden Ring, and it's holding Nightreign back from being something really unique and, in my opinion, an experience that has insane potential to be fun for years to come. This idea I keep hinting at of having a game where you have access to every weapon, item, and spell from nearly every Soulsborne game, and can use those to fight every enemy and boss ever made, sounds like so much fun to me. My biggest fear is that FromSoft listens to all the people complaining about the changes from their usual formula in Nightreign, and they continue to play it safe with their future titles. While some fans want Nightreign to be less of a roguelite and more like Elden Ring, I truly believe it would really shine if the opposite was true. Lean into the roguelite elements, make every run more random, make the upgrades crazier, make the loot more exciting. I love that they're taking risks with this game and trying some very different things, but I want them to go further. The fact that all the weapons and spells from Elden Ring are in the game is great, but what if we made some crazier weapon skills or added new weapons altogether? What if we lifted restrictions on what skills could go with which weapons? What if we could power stance different types of weapons and had a ton of cool new moveset possibilities? It's essentially Elden Ring arcade mode already, so why not just fully embrace that and let me make absolutely ridiculous builds that would never be possible in the original game? As I said earlier, in the roguelites I've played personally, there are runs where you just feel like an absolute god. The combination of loot and upgrades you get are just so insanely overpowered and synergize in the most absurd ways. But in Nightreign, most of your power just comes from rushing as many bosses as you can in the first 2 days to get as high of a level as you can. And the intangible stat upgrades you get from leveling up are nice, but they just don't feel interesting. That feeling of being super overpowered in Nightreign comes more often from hitting level 14 or 15 in your run than it does from the rewards themselves. They just played it so safe, and in my mind, this is the game to try crazy stuff. If they made an Elden Ring 2 and it was a totally different kind of game than Elden Ring 1, then yeah, be upset. I would be too. If they made a Dark Souls 4 but it was a roguelite instead of a Souls-like, then yeah, I'd be upset about that too. But this isn't a main entry in the series, it's just a fun spin-off experience meant to be played with friends that just so happens to use a lot of assets from Elden Ring. I'll be honest, my day one reaction to the game was that it should have been an Elden Ring DLC in the form of a new game mode or something. And I can definitely still appreciate the argument for that, but after playing it for a while, I absolutely believe it has the room to grow beyond Elden Ring, and the fact that it's a standalone game makes me more optimistic for that. Nightreign has insane potential, and I would love nothing more than to see it live up to that.